The Spartans were among the most feared military forces of the ancient world. Despite not having as many soldiers as the Persians nor as many scholars as the Athenians, this small Greek civilization became a worthy opponent of the cultures that longed to take over the region. The secret behind their success was not in the strength of their shields or the sharpness of their spears. It was in a mysterious ancient institution that protected Sparta from the shadows. Welcome to History Facts. Today, I'm going to tell you what life was like for the Spartan secret agents and the never-before-told reasons behind the founding of their mysterious institution. So, let's get started. The best of the best. Spartan education was a little different than the one our parents gave us. Sparta implemented strict eugenics to get the healthiest and strongest citizens to ensure that every soldier was perfect. If the born child was beautiful and had a robust constitution, society accepted him and then was raised by his family. But if he was sick, he was thrown down a ravine or abandoned on a hilltop. Children were not coddled during their stay in the family environment, since the Spartans sought to train the most brutal soldiers and spies the world had ever known. Wet nurses were even instructed to raise children without diapers to improve their resistance to heat and cold. After all, there was no time for maternal love while Sparta was in peril. At the age of 7, Spartan children left their homes. Then they were separated from their families and placed under the authority of the Paidonimus, magistrates who supervised their military education. After that, they were integrated into the Agele, an infantile military under the command of an older boy called Iron. Despite the belief that the Spartans only knew how to fight, the truth is that they were highly educated. They learned to read, write, and even sing to master the war chants. But the essential part of their training consisted of hardening them physically through fighting, athletics, and the handling of weapons. As you can imagine, not all Spartans had the same physical and mental qualities. This is why some of the most capable young men were taken out of the brutal military school to be recruited by the Crypteia, an ancient Spartan institution that sought out the strongest and most intelligent young men. With barely a knife in their hands, the Crypteia recruits were sent to survive alone in the wilderness around Sparta to kill members of Sparta's slave population, the Helots. If they succeeded, they would become members of one of the most powerful institutions of the ancient world. If not, they would die in the attempt. No time to plow the fields. Sparta needed someone to plow its fields to survive Greece's harsh conditions if all men dedicated their lives to the army. For this region, Sparta had the Helots, a group of enslaved people who lived in Laconia and Messenia, regions in which the city of Sparta was settled, and whose primary function was to plow the farms so that the Spartans could devote all their energies to military practice. As was the case in any civilization with enslaved people, the Helots were not happy with how they were treated and wanted to regain their freedom. For this reason, Sparta created the Cryptea to get rid of the strongest and bravest Helots to guarantee their internal security, eliminating all potential internal threats and focus on the external enemies. The rite of passage of Cryptea. After being recruited by the Cryptea, the young Spartans were sent out with only a knife, cloak, and a minimal amount of food to survive in the countryside. Isolated from their friends and compatriots, they had to rest during the day, explore the hills at night, and slit the throats of every dangerous Helot they encountered. To get rid of the best Helots, the Spartans sent their agents to the camps where they believed the most vigorous and most independent Helots were concentrated, so that their slaughter would not be in vain. There are many reasons why the Spartans decided to install this institution. First, it was a military exercise and initiation rite that sent the best Spartan recruits to obtain their own food and fight their own enemies in physically demanding autumnal conditions, isolated from all their friends and fellow recruits. In this way, recruits shed the comfort of being part of a hoplite combat formation, where cooperation and codependence were paramount, and they became much more independent. On the other hand, their decision-making abilities were evaluated. As a result, the members of the Cryptea were prepared to survive in the most extreme conditions. In addition, they learned how to assess and identify who might be the most threatening individuals to their city and how to choose their victims. This knowledge was of vital importance, especially in times of war, since assessing which members of the enemy army could be the most problematic could change the course of a battle. Preventative tactics against rebellion. Considering that there were 7 helots for every free Spartan citizen, it should be no surprise that the Spartans were fearful of facing a possible rebellion. As Cryptea said in his writings, "In the city of Sparta, the free were freer and the slaves more fully slaves than elsewhere." To make matters worse, the Spartans treated helots as animals and would not allow them to leave the place they served. In addition, all helots were publicly beaten to remind them of their humble position, and killing one of these slaves was not even a punishable act. Helots were not only the state's property, but also seen as enemies and were forced to wear humiliating clothing that distinguished them from free citizens. Eventually, this harsh treatment led to the Spartans having to create the Cryptea to prevent their slaves from rebelling and slitting their throats at night. The actions of the Cryptea served as a preemptive tactic against rebellions because the helots knew that at a specific time of the year, their most prominent members of the population would disappear. And that prevented the slaves from being able to feel at ease for too long. The earthquake that caused the rebellion. At best, the relationship between the Spartans and the helots was contentious. After the earthquakes in 464 BC, the helots tried to take advantage of the chaos and rebel against their masters. But sadly, that did not end well. The helot rebellion's failure led the Spartans to treat their slaves much worse. According to Plutarch, the Spartans forced some slaves to drink large quantities of wine and then sent them to the soup kitchens to show the young men what drunkenness was. They would even order them to sing songs and perform ridiculous dances to entertain the Spartans on other occasions, but that only happened to the more fortunate slaves. For those accused of desertion, a long flogging or a painful public execution awaited them. Betrayal never comes from an enemy. In 425 BC, the Spartans sent a proclamation to the helots to choose from among their population those slaves who had served the Spartans most bravely and were most deserving of their freedom. This delegation of helots, composed of 2,000 men who considered themselves worthy of freedom, was received with open arms, and its members were presented with garlands placed around their necks. As a token of gratitude and friendship, the Spartans organized a tour of the temples for the helots. Unfortunately, the 2,000 helots disappeared during this tour without leaving a trace in written records. Unfortunately, this story highlights how expendable the helots were in the eyes of the Spartans. Even though this delegation was composed of the helots who had done the most for Sparta, this made them a threat, as they were the ones who felt they most deserved their freedom and therefore were the ones most likely to incite a rebellion. This is why the Spartans gathered them together to kill them all. Today, we can better understand how the Cryptea functioned thanks to Plutarch, Thucydides, and Xenophon. And we know that it was a secret service that kept the slaves in line and quelled rebellions before they even started. With no internal enemies to worry about, Sparta was able to forget about the threat of the helots and invest all its efforts into capturing and murdering its enemies across the border, which allowed its reign of terror to last for years to come. Therefore, the Spartan Empire could dominate the region during Greece's bloodiest years. That's all for now. See you in the next video with another interesting topic.